snow fell in slow, tireless spirals over the masts, knitting sea and sky into a single pale cloth. The ships slid through White Harbor's cold mouth as if into the breath of a great beast, timbers creaking, ropes stiff with rime. On the foremost deck, Daenerys stood with her gloved hand on the rail and let the needles of winter sting her cheeks. She had learned the names of 1,000 winds in the lands across the narrow sea. This one had no name that she knew. It was simply North, clean with salt and iron and something older than either. Drogon and Rhaegal swept ahead of the fleet, their wings the only dark in a world that had gone quiet and white. Drogon banked and roared, and the sound rolled down the river like a drumbeat. She felt it in her bones. The harbor bells answered a moment later, low and solemn in the fog. "They will fear you," Tyrion said at her shoulder, squinting through the snow. He wore a fur-lined cloak that dwarfed him, the brooch of the hand winking dull in the cold light. "And then they will decide what to make of that fear. Fear is a coin. It spends, but it does not invest." "I did not come to buy them," she said. "I came for the winter. I came to stay." He turned his small, clever face up to her. "You've said it a dozen times. Still, I confess I keep waiting for you to add for now." She did not answer. It wasn't a line to speak twice. It belonged to the fog and the snow and the first step onto a shore she had chosen. The harbor was a forest of frozen ropes and bearded men. The Manderley banners hung limp, the green merman on sea blue dulled by frost. People peered from under the eaves of warehouses and from behind stacks of salted fish, their breath ghosting the air. When the gangplank thudded onto the jetty, silence washed over the crowd as complete as a held breath. Lord Wyman Manderley stood waiting at the head of his household. Age had pulled him into a shape like a great willow in winter, yet his eyes were sharp as beads of ice. He had wrapped his bulk in white furs and leaned on a scepter of carved whalebone. A dozen knights in sea blue cloaks flanked him, their helms powdered with snow. "Your Grace," he said, and the words were careful, not warm. "White Harbor gives harbor. Harbor first. Welcome second." "Harbor is welcome enough," Daenerys answered and inclined her head. She did not reach for a crown she had left packed away in a chest, nor for titles that would choke the cold air. "My people will need grain, wood, warmth. We have brought our own stores, and we have coin, but winter eats coin as greedily as men." Wyman's gaze slid to the dragons circling the piers. "And what will winter make of them?" "Little." Daenerys lifted a hand, and Drogon stooped at the gesture, vast as a fall of night. He settled onto the ice-scabbed quay like a king to his dais, the heat of him rippling through the air in a wavering shimmer. Steam rose where snow melted. The crowd breathed as one, a single involuntary sound. Fear, awe, memory, she could not tell. "Dragons," said a woman's cracked voice near the back, cracked like a log under too much frost. "In the north. Winter brings old things out of hiding," Daenerys replied, though she doubted the woman could hear. "And old debts do." Wyman's mouth twitched. "We keep our guest right, Your Grace. We will keep it with you. There is a roof for your folk and fodder for your beasts. But White Harbor has not forgotten the wolves. Nor have I come to supplant them." The old lord studied her a long time, the snow spinning unreproached around his heavy lids. When he spoke again, it was with the careful courtesy of a host with too many guests and not enough rooms. "Then you will want the road to Winterfell. It is hungry." "So am I," Daenerys said softly. "For it." They rode out the next day, while the harbor gulls screamed at the dragons and the snow obligingly stopped. Every gust off the river was a knife. The Dothraki hunched in their furs, cheeks raw, their braids stiff with ice. The Unsullied did not hunch. Grey Worm's eyes shone black and unblinking above his scarf. He watched the road as if winter might attack by rank and file, drum and trumpet. Missandei's breath smoked in careful puffs as she recited names to the scribes riding behind her, tallying stores, setting markers for the wagons to follow. Daenerys took the lead alone with Drogon shadowing, Rhaegal weaving ahead. No rider but the wind would take Rhaegal yet, and she had not tried to force it. The road within the first hours taught them everything Tyrion had promised. Snowdrifts up to the saddle, patches of iron ice, trees leaning low with white weight. They passed farmsteads shuttered and silent, the lamplight behind oiled skins a faint amber. Children stood in doorways with their fingers in their mouths, the dragons mapped across their faces in flickering shadow. At a village where the road bent around a frozen pond, the plowmen left their spades to kneel. Daenerys slid from the saddle and lifted one to his feet. His hands were chapped raw. His beard was a rim of frost. "Keep your knees," she told him. "I'll take your oath standing." He blinked like a man waking. "What oath would you have, milady?" He looked at the dragons. His eyes came back to her and held, wary and narrow as a stoat's. "We got oaths enough, seems. That if you are hungry, you will come to Winterfell," Daenerys said. "That you will tell your neighbor and not let him starve in pride. That if any man of mine takes what is yours without coin or leave, you will bring his name and mine together to the maester's table and watch what's done about it." A scrawny boy with hair the color of wet straw whispered, "And what will you do, lady, if a man of yours steals a hen?" Daenerys looked over his head at the pond, where the ice lay dark as steel. "If a man of mine steals a hen," she said, "I will make him pluck it, gut it, roast it, and eat it with the family he stole from. Then I will have him flogged for forgetting who we are. I am not here to take." Grey Worm shifted, a faint movement. Tyrion's cough was the rasp of a file. The plowman's eyes creased at the corners. "You talk like a North woman already." "I mean to," she said, and left a sack of oats on the stoop, and another in the hands of a girl whose teeth chattered. When Drogon exhaled a soft flare of heat to melt their stoop free of ice, the child laughed, a bright, wild sound. The laugh followed Daenerys down the road, and it surprised her how much she wanted to carry it all the way to Winterfell. Winterfell rose out of the white like a memory carved in basalt. Walls upon walls, the red leaves of the gods would a single wound of color in a field of snow. Steam from the hot springs drifted across the low slate roofs as if the castle itself breathed. Wolves howled on the wind, distant and electric. As Drogon curved low, 100 arrows were notched in 100 hands, then lowered again at a shouted command that came clean as water in winter. They rode under the portcullis. The iron teeth scraped over their heads. The courtyard was lined with men in wool and women in boiled leather. The air was thick with the smell of wet fur and wood smoke. The Stark banner hung over the great hall, the gray direwolf hunting across white. Daenerys thought of banners she had burned and banners she had never seen. She thought, for a moment, of ashes. Then the great door opened and she had no room left for ashes or thought. Sansa Stark came forward with the cave-cool grace of a woman who had learned the use of her silences. She wore a mantle of white fox. Beside her strode Brienne of Tarth, steel blue and steady, and on Sansa's other side walked Davos Seaworth, the smuggler recast as a northern lord's right hand by the simple alchemy of trust. Behind them, Arya Stark was a shadow under the lintel, a slight figure whose eyes were lanterns in a still face, and Bran Stark sat in his wheeled chair with his hands loosely folded, the weirwood thread in his gaze as old as the stone. Between their lines stood Jon Snow. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders. His face had always been a study in resolve. Now it was resolve worn lean by grief and work. When he lifted his eyes to the dragons, something moved in him like a bird beneath ice and then stilled. He looked at her, and heat struck through the day like a spark jumping in dry straw. "Your Grace," he said. He did not kneel. "Winterfell returns courtesy with courtesy. You are most welcome, for none of us are." He glanced at the walls. "And we should be. Lord Snow," Tyrion murmured, as if to taste an old familiarity that had gone sour in winter air. "King in the north," said Davos, with a look that warned against old games. He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. The title sat in the courtyard like a third wolf. Daenerys let the quiet unpack itself between them. "I have not come for your crown," she said. "I have come for your winter, and to put mine to it. If you will let me set my hearth here, I will make this the seat of my house and defend it as my own." She let her voice carry so that it touched the faces at the back, the stable boys on the stones, the old women with their hands in their sleeves. I leave the south to the south, for now or for always. I lay no claim to the rivers or the rocks where your wolves don't run. I will defend the gift. I will break the things that hunt in the cold. Sansa's eyes narrowed, the smallest narrowing, an arrowhead of doubt. Words are warm. Winter does not eat them. Then set me tasks that winter does, Daenerys said. Bran's voice came thin and even. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. His eyes did not seem to focus on anything at all. We are very near to the wind. Jon's gaze flicked to him and back. Come inside, he said. You've come far on bad roads. We'll plan when you've eaten. If the Great Hall had remembered laughter once, it remembered it quietly now. The banners hung with a tired dignity. The long tables were set with what the North could afford. Oat bread, stewed onions, a handful of late apples, meat in thin slices that grew cold the moment the trenchers saw daylight. Daenerys took her place not at the head but among them, and when the serving girl's hands shook, she took the girl's hand in hers long enough that the girl smiled, which was not a thing the girl had expected to do. They ate. They spoke little at first, mouths full of steam. When the quiet finally opened, Tyrion raised his cup toward Sansa, and for the flicker of a moment they were a man and a woman who had survived an ugly night with grace instead of weapons. Lady Stark, he said, the gods, old and new, if we are exhausting our options, have been kind enough to spare us both. It is good to see that kindness has not made you foolish. Sansa's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. You always had a tongue. I have two still, depending on which courtier you ask. Sansa let that pass like a bird over snow. She turned to Daenerys. You would make Winterfell your seat. I would. Daenerys felt the gaze of the hall as surely as if 1,000 fingers had pressed against her skin. I know what it is to be a guest in my own life. I will be a guest no more. If you deny me this, I will set my hearth elsewhere. But I will not set it in the south to play at another's game while the dead draw breath in the north. Arya spoke for the first time, soft and precise. You say the word dead as if you've seen them. I have not, Daenerys said. But I have seen men who think they cannot be killed, and I have killed them. The difference is smaller than we wish. It is not small, Jon said. The words cut the air. Davos cleared his throat. The sound was as tactful as a door closing. We'll need ironmongers working day and night, dragonglass weapons, and not just for lords. Nails and spikes. If you'll forgive blunt talk, your grace. He nodded to Daenerys. A dragon's fire is worth 1,000 torches, and that's a thing we'll need if the storm comes at night. Dragonglass, Tyrion echoed. From Dragonstone, which we do inconveniently possess. He smiled without amusement. A pity we cannot pick up the island and move it closer. We can bring the island to us in shards, Daenerys said. I have ships at White Harbor and more to come. If you put a man at the river mouth with a tally board, I'll make sure he earns his keep. Sansa's hands lay folded upon the table. And what do you want in return? She asked, gently enough that the point of the question was a scalpel, not an axe. Daenerys considered truth and weight. You're listening, she said. And if the time comes when I am cold or blind or proud in a way that hurts the living, I want your hand on my sleeve to pull me back. I did not come to rule alone. Tyrion flicked her a glance of grudging admiration. Sansa's head lowered a fraction, the fox fur bristling. We are not good at gentle hands in the north, she said. But we can try to be good at sleeves. Later, when the hall had drained and the last trenchers were stacked, Jon came to find her in the yard where the snow was a clean sheet and the sound of the springs was a dream of summer trapped under stone. Drogon lay coiled, his sides rising with slow bellows breaths. Rhaegal perched on the outer wall, tail drooping over the battlements, head kinked to an angle as if eavesdropping on the stones. Not to the gods wood? Daenerys asked. She had seen him glance toward it 6 times that night, a needle tugged by a lodestone. Later, he said, the steam from his breath broke against the air like glass. I meant what I said. The dead are not like men. They don't tire. They don't fear. They don't bleed because their blood's already on the ground. I have fought them, and I have watched others die to them. They don't bargain. They simply come. And yet, even winter must end. He almost smiled. You say that like a southern woman. I am not southern any longer. They stood in the kind of quiet that is almost sound. The whisper of flakes on leather, the hiss of living heat in a cold yard. At last Jon lifted his eyes from her dragons and looked full at her. You'll find no easy love here, he said. Not for dragons, not for queens. If you truly mean to make Winterfell your seat, you'll have to earn it in ways that hurt. And you'll have to make peace with the things that don't love you and never will. I have made peace with worse. You think so? He shook his head. I hope you're right. Tell me what to do. Jon's gaze shifted to the wall where Regal watched the yard like a patient hawk. You flew across the sea to reach a throne, he said. Can you sit still to keep a hearth? He pulled his fur tighter about his shoulders. There's a village called Cinder Reach beyond the Barrows. They starve earlier than most. If you want to be queen of Winterfell, begin with their ovens. Get them bread. Get them heat. And don't send a steward. He let a breath out. Go. She almost laughed for the relief of it. To bake bread. To be seen, Jon said simply. Not on a dragon. On your feet. She went. They broke the road open with shovels and old songs. She walked beside Grey Worm, her boots filling with snow, until her thighs burned and her breath came hard. The Dothraki sang between their teeth harsh little jokes. Missandei tucked her fingers into her sleeves and walked with a smooth steadiness Daenerys envied. At Cinder Reach, 14 houses, a fallen-in smithy, a white-buttressed ash tree. The snow lay level with the low thatch. There is a way a door opens when a stranger knocks with her bare knuckles and the person outside is a queen and is not. She sent the flames from Drogon's gut through a ruined bakehouse until the stones sweated. She held a child while the mother fetched a kettle from under a heap of skins. She burned the snow from a well cap and watched the steam rise like summer's ghost. She built the first loaf with her own hands because she remembered a day in a lean-to behind a slave market when a girl had given her bread and told her that the best thing about bread was not its taste but how it filled your hands. The men of Cinder Reach watched her without kneeling, and Daenerys found she preferred it. She took a shovel and worked until Grey Worm made her stop because her hands had blistered and the blood was freezing to the pine handle. When they left, she left 3 sacks of oats and the scent of wood smoke in stones that had not remembered it in too long. That night, back at Winterfell, she laid her raw palms on the warm flank of Drogon and listened to him rumble the way he had when he was small enough to coil around her arms. Bread first, Sansa said when news came back from the road with Daenerys's chapped hands ahead of it. Something eased, not melted, in Sansa's eyes, like a river deciding where to run come spring. We can use you. Use me, Daenerys said, and meant it. They set to work. The roar of the forges rose day by day, and the smithy fires ate night as if it were the old enemy. Gendry came up from the cellar where the sparks had fallen thick as summer flies, hair singed and grin blackened with soot, to show dragonglass arrowheads that glinted blue as winter stones. Davos took the harbor in hand, turning White Harbor's docks into a throat that could swallow and spit out ships at his order. Tyrion drew lines over maps in ashen wine, and Brienne repainted the old ground with a soldier's neat mind. The Unsullied learned to move in snow that took a man's shins and would not give them back. The Dothraki learned to curve their horses around banked drifts the way they had learned to ride sand slopes. Missandei learned the shapes of northern names, and the people learned hers. Jorah Mormont came from Bear Island to take the Queen's hand and did not expect forgiveness to fit his palm. Lyanna Mormont gave him a glare like a thrown knife and then, with the economy of a soldier short on time and pity, gave him the command of 34 bears who could loose an arrow in wind and never miss. He took it with a bow that acknowledged both her gift and her intent not to soften it. When he left the hall, Daenerys touched Lyanna's shoulder, and the girl bore it like a weight she had chosen. Melisandre came one evening when the snow had silvered under a sickle moon and the shadows were knife-sharp. She stood beneath the gatehouse with frost in her hair like ash. Her eyes were the color of old copper. "My queen," she said. though there had been a day not so long ago when she would have said my king. The night is a mouth. It will swallow everything. But mouths can be burned. You look cold, Daenerys said, and heard Tyrion's indrawn breath behind her as if she had thrown a cup into a prayer hall. You may warm yourself at my hearth. We have no room for gods. We have room for anything that burns. Melisandre's smile was thin. And I am old. Old women do not ask to be loved, only to be used while the world has need. They put her at the dull end of the long table. She ate sparingly and drank heat like a woman in from a storm. When the cups were cleared, she traced a circle of ash on the board and pushed it with 2 fingers. You must not be drawn into a storm, she said to Daenerys. He will call you with the cold and the whiteness. All your life you have been called. Your dragon knows how to fly into what loves him. And out, Daenerys said. She looked to Bran, who watched Melisandre with the unblinking courtesy of a stone watching a river. Tell us what you see. He did not blink. I see the woods at last hearth branched with diamonds. I see a boy with blue eyes and a spiral of limbs nailed to the door around him. I see breath that is not breath on the air. His voice stayed flat, the water of a stream under ice. They will come. We should go to them before they're at the wall, Jon said. The words came fast, an old instinct pushing him forward. Hit their vanguard. Ambush the scouts. If they move like they did at Hardhome, they'll tear anything we set in front of them. Not anything, Daenerys said. She laid a finger on the map. We didn't bring dragons to watch. But if you ask me to throw them into a blizzard and hope they know which way is up, she looked to Melisandre. I will say no. I won't lose them to the wind. Tyrion tapped the place where the road from Last Hearth ran toward Winterfell like a black vein. We build fire at our choosing, he said. We set trenches here and here, and a funnel they can't ignore. And when they commit, we light it. Jon's jaw tightened. Fire doesn't stop them. It slows them, confuses their edges. They go over or they go through. Then we let it slow them while we strike what cannot be slowed. Brienne's voice carried calm assurance. You have fought them. Tell us where it hurts. They're generals, Jon said, the word like iron. The White Walkers, not the dead. Break one and the dead near them fall. Break him. And the shape of the knight that had stabbed him on the wild coast was a pain in his eyes. And the rest, like cutting a hydra's head, Tyrion murmured. Like killing the head, Jon said. They aren't hydras and they don't bleed. They're a mind. And they don't love. Then they won't expect the things men expect, Daenerys said. She felt the weight of the hall's attention and let it press her spine straight. We give them things they don't understand. We give them hunger, and we give them heat. She went to the Godswood at dawn, because if she meant to lay a hearth here, she would not pretend the red leaves did not stand where any queen should kneel. The face in the weirwood watched from the brick of bark with an old human sorrow that had forgotten its name. Snow lay on the roots like lace. Jon stood beside her, quiet as the tree. What do you ask for when you ask? She said. I don't, he said. I listen. She listened. The air was the breath of stones. The sound of the springs came thin under the ground. A raven shifted in a branch above, cracking ice with the soft knocking of its claws. When she looked at Jon, his eyes were on the trunk as if his gaze might work like a knife and cut deeper rings. Bran told me what he saw, Daenerys said. About you. Jon nodded once. He had the air of a man carrying something he had meant to set down sometime, and had never found a table strong enough. It doesn't change anything. His voice was flat and fierce. It changes how men will behave when they know. It shouldn't. Men are poor at shouldn't. She let the thin smile die. I won't use it against you. He laughed once, without mirth. Good. It's no weapon. If I wanted crowns, I had a chance to keep one once. I gave it up for the living. Then we are alike. Are we? We are trying, she said. Trying is not alike. Doing is. He lifted his head, and she saw there something she trusted more than promises. Weariness matched with a refusal to lie down. We'll do it together. Here. He looked at the tree's carved eyes. If we can. They worked until the world was a shape of smoke and frost. When the horns sounded from the outer wall, their notes came brittle, like a dry twig breaking in a silent wood. The dead arrived as the day bled out. The first of them came in a thin line between the trees at last hearth, and then more, and then a sea, the flutter of their ragged skin making a sound like moths at a candle. They did not shout. They did not choose targets. They simply came, and the ground under them whispered with the hush of snow giving way. There are battles that are tempered by speech. This was not one. The men on the ramparts gripped their spears until their hands numbed through the gloves. The archers on the walls set their drag. On-glass heads to strings and did not breathe the first time they pulled. The trenches lay dark and raw. The oil in them shivered with cold. Drogon lifted his head from the yard and unrolled his wings, heat ghosting the snow to mist. Regal sprang to the wall, then launched, green as a pine in a frozen world, and the wind of his rise knocked powdered snow loose from the battlements in a glittering breath. Daenerys swung into the saddle with emotion she felt in her ribs, closed her gloved fingers around leather. "Keep high," Tyrion had said in the council. "Let the fire be a fog to them, not a sword to you. Stay down," Brienne had told Sansa, and Sansa had smiled in a way that said she had learned what men mean by that. "Guard the godswood," Jon had said to Theon Greyjoy, whose mouth had set in a familiar line of a man choosing the terms of his own punishment. Whatever comes. The first wave hit the trenches and found them cold. They spilled into the ditch with the soft thudding sounds of meat on earth. Then Melisandre walked to the edge and put her hand out over the oil, and the fire came up like a memory of summer too sudden to be sweet. Light leaped, wild and orange. The roar of it bit into the quiet. For a moment the dead flowed to either side like water around a stone. "Now," Davos said, and the archers loosed, and the first line of the dead shuddered and dropped with the sound of things breaking in the next room. The men cheered as men will. It was a small cheer and had no place to sleep. The dead did not care. The next lines came. They threw themselves onto the flames and their bodies made bridges. The trenches sang like kettles. The smell was like a slaughterhouse under noon sun. Drogon dove at Daenerys' thought, and she put a river of fire across the field that bucked and coiled and set the moonlight shivering. Men on the wall put their fists to their mouths to keep their hearts inside when they saw the way the ranks of corpses folded and then rose again, blackened and still walking. Regal swept behind them, pinions beating, and his breath made a line of glowing embers that fell onto bone and rag. "Not for show," she told Drogon, as if he were a squire that needed talking to. "For time. Buy me time. Time and a place to buy it." The plan was a funnel and a blade, fire to shape the sea into a river. The dead flowed along the warmed mud where Drogon had cut them channels, and men met them in those channels with dragonglass pikes and long knives and axes. The Unsullied did not shout. They planted their boots and let the dead come, and made small motions, efficient as a clock. Jab, withdraw, step, the soft knock of bone. The Dothraki rode the inside edge of the trenches, ghost quick. There are rocks alight with Melisandre's orange and blue fire, and they cut and cut and cut until the sweat froze in their eyebrows. Behind it all, at the heart of the godswood that could not be ruined by anything that did not understand what a tree was, Bran waited in his chair under the red leaves. Theon's men stood around him in a loose ring with spears like teeth. The ravens never sat still. One broke off now and then to carry something of what Bran knew to someone who needed it. A murmur in a mind, a shape in the corner of an eye. The White Walkers moved like the idea of cold through trees, and nearer they came, their armor whispering like ice on ice. "Not yet," Bran said, and his voice brimmed with the notness of the world. "Not yet." On the wall, Sansa stood with Arya like a woman standing with her shadow. They looked in two directions at once. Brienne paced below with her helm off, her hair powdered with frost, counting men who fell and men who stood again and weighing one against the other with an ache in her eyes. Davos's hands were a map of signals, sending men to fill a gap or to hold a line with a flick of his wrist. Tyrion watched the sky, and his lips moved with numbers. On Drogon's back, Daenerys watched the storm come in. It rolled the night into a darker night. She felt it as a pressure in her ears, a weight on the lungs. Rhaegal cut through it once like a knife and came out shuddering, trailing frost off his wings that fell to the field like shattered glass. Drogon roared, and the storm swallowed the sound. She knew at once when he came. It was the silence inside the storm. She could not see his crown of ice, nor the pale sword in his hand, nor the dead thing he rode, a dragon's body hammered into a weapon. She only knew the way the air grew still around a presence that hated warmth with a hatred that was not anger but a simple, mechanical purpose. She felt it like fever. Drogon felt it too. He bucked under her, his mind flaring with a fear older than any language she had learned. "No," she said aloud, and laid her body along his neck, palms flat. "No, I am with you." Rhaegal streaked past with a keen that peeled a strip from her heart. Jon sat a saddle at last, his hands low and steady. He pointed Rhaegal's nose at the eye of the storm. The pair vanished into white. "Do not duel him," Tyrion had said. "Do not give him a story to tell about your courage. He doesn't tell stories. Make him a problem. Make him a number." Daenerys did not think of numbers. She thought of funnels and knives and the way fire changed the shapes of things without having to fight them. She angled Drogon under the storm's edge and painted its belly with burning. The air went amber and wild. Snow hissed. The ranks of the dead faltered as heat took their knees. On the ground, men shouted, a little ragged, with light in their mouths. Then a hole opened in the blizzard, a pair of eyes of absolute blue, and she saw it. The Night King like an idea made hard, his hair frozen in a crown's mockery, and the dead dragon's blue fire pouring across the field where men had stood. The flame was not fire, it was cancellation. The trench's rim turned black and then white and then fell in without noise. Dozen men ceased to be men. The dead moved faster. Rhaegal came down in a gout of snow and anger. The two dragons struck and tangled in a knot of wings and teeth. For a heartbeat she didn't know which was which. Jon's voice carried up through the dark. A hoarse cry. Not fear. Not yet. The dead dragon's claws found Rhaegal's shoulder. Scales flew like slate shards. Daenerys hauled hard, Drogon veering as the blue fire sought them. Heat struck her face where the fire wasn't, for even not fire made the air burn. "Above," she said, and Drogon rose, and the storm tried to swallow him and couldn't. She found the rim of the world, the tight line where the black and blacker met, and she ran it, keeping the dead dragon below and behind. Jon clung with his knees, small as a flea on Rhaegal's back. She felt the shape of his fear in her own chest and wondered that it could be so simple. "I will keep him alive until he does the thing only he can do." On the ground, Melisandre's voice lifted in words that sounded like a man striking flint. The trenches flared where they had died. The dead went over. The White Walkers reached the Godswood. Theon Greyjoy's first spear broke in a skull. The second found nothing and struck bark. The third became a lever with a dead body at the end of it, and Theon pulled, and the dead slid down its length like bad meat. He had time, in the space between breaths, to think I was not made for this and to hear his own mind answer that is not true any longer. Bran looked at him once, and it was as if Bran had placed a hand on his cheek and forgiven him for something Theon had not asked to be forgiven for. The White Walkers stepped out of the trees like consequences. Sansa's hand found Arya's and squeezed once. Hard. "Not yet," Arya whispered, and Sansa nodded. And there was in it a trust that would have made their father smile and never speak of it. Brienne mounted and rode for the gap in the West Trench, her sword a ribbon of dark. Gendry put a bundle of dragonglass into Hound's hands and did not flinch at the flame in his eyes. Davos kept the signals going. A man playing a song he had learned in a different life and refusing to forget the tempo. In the eye of the storm, Jon brought Rhaegal down into the Godswood, the branches whipping at the dragon's sides like cords. He leaped from the saddle before Rhaegal's claws found earth. He hit the ground and rolled and came up with Longclaw in his hands. The Night King stepped into the space with him. The air crackled like iron biting into ice. Drogon landed on the far side of the trees at Daenerys' will, and she let the saddle go and hit the snow. Her knees went to holes. The cold reached up and seized her bones as if it had been waiting for her all her life. She ran, and the red leaves brushed her hair, and Theon went to his knees with a spear through his chest and his mouth full of nothing. "Go," Theon said, or meant, his blood very red on the white snow. If he said thank you, it was the kind that needs no ears. The Night King turned his head. The ice that was, his face indifferent. Jon moved in from the left, Longclaw a gray flicker. The Night King parried without looking. Daenerys did not shout a warning. She had learned not to waste warnings on men who already knew. She picked up what lay to hand. A spear she had made the day before with her own fingers blistering, dragonglass splinters still under her nails. She came at the Night King as if she were another soldier in a line of them. He did not see her, because he did not understand women in God's woods. He did not understand that anything wanted anything but to kill and not be killed. He turned toward Jon, and Jon fainted, and the Night King took it because he had never needed to fear a lie, and Daenerys drove the dragonglass into the notch where the bones of his shoulder met the bones of his throat, and the armor did not lie. The spear found purchase and slid. There was a sound like a lake breaking. He staggered, only that, not a fall. He lifted his sword. His mouth did not change. He did not have one. Fire roared. Not Drogon's. The weirwood itself brightened. The red leaves inflamed, not consuming. Melisandre's hands lifted. Her wrists skin and ash. The heat lifted in a wall between the Night King and the place where men stood, and for the first and only time he hesitated. Jon brought Longclaw down. Metal met ice. The ice screamed. The Night King turned, very slowly, and looked past them into the place where the world stored its oldest memory. For a beat, the storm itself seemed to decide. Then Arya Stark fell out of the tree. She fell without sound, the catspaw blade inverted in her hand. He caught her by the throat, fingers closing, because he had caught everything that came at him for 1,000 years, and why should this be different? Her face did not change. Her other hand was empty, then full. She dropped the blade and caught it by the hilt at waist height, and the dragonglass that had been meant for the blade turned in the air and went up. Daenerys never saw the blade go in. She saw the moment before and the moment after. The moment before was a form of cold that tried to remember what love had been like in the first days of the world. The moment after was the sound of a winter lake failing under too much weight. The Night King's body fractured like a pane of blown glass under a blacksmith's hammer. Light went out. Something that had been feeding for centuries tasted hunger and could not remember what to do with it. The army of the dead fell as if the strings had been cut from 1,000 puppets all at once. The White Walkers shattered into snow and knife edges of ice that melted as they fell. The trees breathed again. Men remembered to breathe at all. Silence after terror is not like any other silence. It has a ringing in it like an anvil when the hammer is lifted. In that ringing, Daenerys put her hand on Arya's shoulder. Arya's pulse went under her pal. Fast as a hair. They were both smiling and both not smiling, because there were men on the ground that would not rise again, and there was Theon's body, and there were wolves keening something nobody had words for. "Your Grace," Jon said, very soft, like a man hearing a distant sound he had been waiting for. Daenerys looked at him and saw that he was bleeding down the side of his face and had not noticed. She reached to touch him, then did not. There were 100 men closer to dying than he was, and she had taught herself not to spend her touch too freely. They burned the bodies for 3 days. The smoke curled into the unmoving sky as if the air had stiffened and would not accept it. The weirwood did not burn, though Melisandre pressed her palm to it until frost cracked on the bark and her eyes went as blank as coins. The last of the dead ran out of them like water from a sieve. When the fires sank to coals and the quiet eased into something not like terror, Daenerys took off her gloves and sat where the roots broke the ground, and Bran watched her with his unreadable eyes. "You were always going to sit here," he said. It was not a question and not comfort either. Daenerys touched her bruised palm and smiled in a way that felt like breaking and mending at once. "Then it is good that I came before the chair was cold." They called her Queen of Winterfell because they had to call her something. Daenerys did not correct the ones who said Queen in the north, nor the ones who said Lady, nor the stubborn old woman from Deepwood Mott who would only call her Dany and had to be stopped with a gentle hand by her daughter. She wore no iron crown. She wore a cloak lined in wolf and stitched with threads of red that Missandei put into it with a care that felt like prayer. If she had looked south, she might have seen cities and seas. She did not look south. Winterfell filled her eyes as if it had grown there. She set her council in the solar that looked down on the yard, where boys hit one another with blunted sticks and girls turned them deftly onto their backs. Sansa presided over the counting of grain with the pitiless kindness of a woman who knew exactly what a loaf meant. Jon went out with Regal in slow circles, learning the weight of the saddle as if he were learning to be a boy again, grievously and with joy. Davos divided ships and men like a baker readying loaves for an army, and made the Manderleys love him for his swearing alone. Brienne wrote down the names of the dead in a careful hand and read them at night. Tyrion added a hearth tax to keep the forges fed and lost 3 nights' sleep, finding a way to make the poorest dodge it without telling the richest. "I thought you were a queen," the boy from Cinder Reach said when he saw Daenerys standing up to her ankles in mud beside the foundation of the new glass gardens. His face was clean now, and he had grown 2 inches in as many months, which happens when there is bread. He stared at the dark panes as if they were a castle of the gods. "I am," she said, and lifted a pane with him until the frame took it. "But the spinach will not grow if I tell it to." They built over the hot springs that fed Winterfell's hidden veins. They threw a skin of glass and timber and made a hothouse where green things would remember themselves even when the wind bit and would not let go. Daenerys walked the rows, her breath a fog, and put her palm to the glass when the sun struck. She had learned once to love deserts because they told the truth about thirst. She learned now to love a leaf. The free folk came down from the ruined rim of the world as if the ice had unclenched its fist and let people fall out of it. Tormund Giantsbane brought them, his laugh raw with relief and smoke. Ghost's white shape padded at his heel, eyes like coals banked under snow. They wanted land and not to be told lists, and the North wanted its skin whole. Daenerys sat with them in a longhouse that had seen a king once and a cow the winter after, and she drew the maps, her sleeve gray with ash where she leaned in. "The gift," she said, "the space between wall and river. You will take it, and you will answer to no lord for your sow's count. But if wildlings raid into the barrows and I find them, I will take the raiders' boots and their knives and their pride, and I will make them stand in the square at Winterfell and say where they were wrong and how they will be right." Tormund laughed until he wept. "You sound like a wildling grandmother," he told her. And when the laughter died, the word grandmother remained in the air like a blessing. Cersei did not come north. Of all the good fortunes granted the living, Daenerys thought, the best was that some enemies loved themselves too much to make the hard journey. Euron Greyjoy, being made of different hunger, sent his black ships to snap at White Harbor's traffic and to carry off what the winter would give him. Davos brought Yara Greyjoy upriver like a spear of salt, and Daenerys looked at her and saw the hard new muscle of a woman who had paid a price and meant to collect her debt. "Help me keep this open," Daenerys said, hands on the harbor wall where salt had been freezing for centuries. "You can have any southern throne you can carry in your arms." "I want my own," Yara said and grinned like a cut. "But I can help you keep your door." They set traps under the water, chains and firepots, wicked as eel teeth. When Euron's flagship, all iron ribs and black laugh, chased a cask of lamp oil into the bight, the chains came up at Davos's word and caught her, and the pots broke and the sea burned with a roar that turned night into a noon like hell's. Drogon came down once, grinning flame, and men on the shore saw their first dragon fire on open water and forgot to be afraid because the sight was too large for fear. "You could have burned them alone," Yara said afterward, wringing water out of her hair with both hands. "I am not alone," Daenerys said. "That is the point." Winter's teeth loosened slowly. It didn't retreat so much as lean back and sniff the air. Daffodils poked yellow tongues out of snow at the edge of the godswood. The boy from Cinder Reach stole too, was caught, and was made to stand in front of the glass gardens and recite a speech about hunger and beauty that Missandei wrote in a kind hand, and that he executed with a ferocity that made the assembled women hide their smiles. Daenerys stood with her hands behind her back and kept a straight face with the iron control of a queen. Then she clipped the flowers herself and put them in a jar beside the names Brienne had written. Word came as it must. Slow in the way news must move through people who are still alive and must stop to eat before they talk. Cersei had tightened her fingers around the capital like a woman pressing her hand over a wound and telling herself it was nothing. The Riverlands had declared for themselves and then for anything that brought them a salt bag that didn't have stones in it. The Reach had burned and sprouted again. Kings from old houses and newer pretenders breaking over one another like waves. Dorne remained a knife in its sheath, cold and patient. "You could take it," Tyrion said one evening when the light in the solar was the kind that makes cities look nearer than they are. "The South. You have the dragons and the name, and the worst of the winter is past. March down the King's Road and take it city by city until your enemies are tired of dying for men who would slit their mothers' throats for a goblet." "I could," Daenerys said. She was writing, her quill scratching with a sound like cats under a chair. The parchment smelled faintly of oil and old books. "And I would have it, and it would not be this." "This?" Tyrion said, and his mouth was wry. "Spinach." "This?" she said, and looked up at him with a smile that had the North's flint in it now. "People not starving. Green things growing where there were none. A harbor that brings food instead of iron. Why should I trade that for a chair in a city that has learned to love nothing but its own shadow?" "Because chairs are delicious," Tyrion said, and then sobered. "Because Cersei will not stop with her shadow. Because you cannot guard the North with your back to a knife." "She will come north," Daenerys said. "Someday. Or she will send men who think themselves knives. When she does, we will be ready. And if we go south, we go as a people, not as a queen with an army at her back. I won't bring the Dothraki to burn orchards while I sit a glass palace and call it peace." "You are making a new thing," Tyrion said, the words falling careful. "New things are dangerous. Old things are dead," Daenerys said. "We have had enough of them." The day she spoke the charter of the hearth. No parchment grand enough to call law, only words said aloud where the yard could hear them. Was a day like any in the slow unfreezing, sun week, the snow underfoot like old salt. She stood on the steps with her cloak over her shoulders and her hair braided back with small bits of bone that Lyanna Mormont had thrust into her hands without explanation. Sansa stood at her right, a gray quill in her fingers. Jon stood at her left, Regal's shadow crossing him now and again as the dragon drifted like a green cloud above the yard. Missandei's handwriting had made the words tidy. Daenerys's voice made them plain. "No man in the North shall be taken from his bed in the night without witness. Every hall shall open its doors 5 nights every month to those who cannot pay for roofs, and a hearth kept there that no one person shall own. Guest right is to be sacred again or not at all. If any man, soldier or no, takes food from a field without leave, he will repay threefold and work the harvest he has stolen." She did not raise her voice on the last line. "And any child hungry within a day's walk of Winterfell will be fed." It was a small thing to ask the poor to walk. It was also everything. Sansa's mouth crooked as if her quill had suddenly written its own name. Davos closed his eyes, just once. Brienne's shoulders loosened by a hair. "It will be broken," Tyrion said later, because he could not help himself. "Men break oaths they find inconvenient. Then we will set the oath again," Daenerys said, "and again, until they learn the shape of it." "In the Godswood, under the White Stair," Jon told her. "He did it the way a man lays a sword across a table, hilt first and with both hands." The words did not surprise her now. Shock dulls when it has to. He spoke Lyanna and Rhaegar, and a tower with a door that opened in a way it should not have, and she listened with her hands folded. "Will you tell them?" she asked when he had finished. "No," he said. "You're afraid of what it would do to me. I'm afraid of what it would do to us." He did not touch her. Neither of them had touched the other since the night Theon died, and they had built up a cairn of words around that lack as tall as a wall. "They'll make it a game. They won't mean to. They'll think they are meaning well. They'll think they are serving honor. And it will break this place." She looked at the tree. The blood-red leaves hung very still. "Then we'll keep it. The truth. Between us and the boy who knows everything and never smiles." He laughed, a short sound. Bran smiles when the wind blows leaves the way it did when he was small. Then we will call a wind when we need him to be kind. They married in spring, in a way that made the old women content and the young ones determined. Sansa tied a strip of cloth around their wrists in the yard with a dozen children clapping and a dozen men pretending not to wipe their eyes, and Arya leaned in and whispered something into Daenerys' ear that made her start and stare and then laugh in a way that showed all her teeth, and the sound put the ravens to wing. Davos danced with Missandei. Dee did not step on her toes. Tyrion drank against the evening when the world would remember what world it was and found that the wine tasted of apple blossom and smoke. Brienne stood sentinel at the edge of the dance with Jaime's memory like a weight that did not hurt when she carried it. In the morning, Daenerys woke before the light and lay with her head on Jon's shoulder and watched the dim gray grow. He breathed as men breathe when sleep is honest and hard-earned. She thought, I could go south and take it all, and that would be one kind of story. Or I could lie here as the light grows on a roof that is old and warm, and that is another. She thought of a child, and of the words she had said in a black tent once to a prophet she had paid too much for lies. She did not ask for promises. She put her hand over Jon's heart and felt it and thought, the only thing that matters is whether I have kept them warm. Cersei came north after all, in the end. Not herself. She sent men with lions on their cloaks and bows that spat iron bolts. And she sent coins to buy the kind of wolves that will eat if you throw enough meat at them. They came in a trickle to test a boundary and then in a tide to flood it. Daenerys met them not at the line where the letters on a map changed color but where the pasture grasses did. The old marker stones seated in earth like worn teeth. She did not bring her dragons at first, though Drogon paced the sky and Rhaegal watched from a height where the sun struck his green and made it a prayer. This is not your ground, the Lannister captain told her. He was young and fine with the complacency of a man who has never had to tell the truth to a woman whose eyes were as old as winter. I hold writs with all due seal and signature. Whose writs? Daenerys asked. Cersei's? She holds what she can keep between her fingers. These people keep their bread between theirs. You are a foreigner. This is a domestic matter. Daenerys let the man's words sink like stones. I am a winter matter, she said. Go home. If you want to live out the summer in your bones, go home. He laughed then, and she learned he had no ear for the tone of things. It ended as such dances do, with men on the ground and a message sent on fast horses to a woman in a city who believed in poems about herself. Euron Greyjoy died in the water trying to storm a man with a net and found out you can drown a net if it holds you down. Qyburn's scorpions shattered on Drogon's scales and were melted into ugly, useful nails. The Lannister men who survived went home because they were tired and had remembered that their farms had names. Now, Tyrion said when the last of them were gone and the days stretched rubber-thin into the kind of summer the North calls borrowed. You could go now and take the city before it knows what shoes to wear. In summer, Daenerys said, when the air is lazy, when people do not want to fight, when the only right you can claim is the one you take with your hand. She shook her head. No, if King's Landing wants me, it can come and fetch me. They sent envoys, and she sat them at the very end of the table, where the soup cools the quickest, and Missandei translated their pretty phrases into plain speech and back. She told them about guest right and hearths and the way a law must live in a kitchen before it sits in a court. She told them to write to her again when they had learned the names of the people who made their bread. Some did. The rest sulked south of the neck and dreamed of ships. Children were born. The firstborn after the charter of the hearth took gasping breaths under the glass roof of the winter garden, with steam filming the panes and a dragon's shadow drifting like a blessing. The mother named her Rhea because she liked the feel of it in her mouth and because names were devotions, and who was anyone to forbid them? Daenerys held the child when she was a day old and thought, all my life I have been lifting heavier things. Let this be the heaviest. Let nothing break this. Jon looked at her and she knew he was thinking of another child and another woman and a room full of blue. She put her palm on his and they held the light thing together. She never put a crown on. Sansa wore the black and gray with a kind of joy that was not joy so much as a river finding its right bed. Arya left, as she was always going to, and the north softened 2 inches in whatever direction she had gone. just enough for men to feel it when they leaned on it. Brienne stayed, and her sword stayed very clean. Davos walked the harbor in the mornings with a cup of broth that steamed in the sea's breath and listened to sailors who had found their tongues now that the storms had loosened their hands. Tyrion wrote a book of sumptuary laws and burned it the next day because he did not want to be the man who had written a book of sumptuary laws. Sometimes Daenerys rode Drogon to the barrows alone and sat on the dragon's warm shoulder and listened to the wind harping in the grass. She did not always know whose bones lay under which mound. It did not matter. The dead were the dead, and she was their queen in the only way any queen can be, by keeping the living from joining them too soon. When she went south for the first time in 2 years, it was not to claim a throne. It was because the Riverlands asked, not a lord, but the millers and the women with calves at heel and the men with knots in their hands from ropes. She took a body of men, not an army, and furs, not banners. And she slept under trees that remembered other kings and other banners and refused to speak of them. In the town of Stony September she met a boy who had never seen snow and thought dragons were what windmills were called in other tongues. She told him a story about a woman who had once been very far from home and did not tell him the ending because he was too young to learn about how stories end. At King's Landing, the bells did not ring. It was a different story, and she was not in it. She stood on a hill beyond the Blackwater and watched the city's lights smear the sky. Cersei had new banners. She kept her old wine. She would die with it on her tongue because some women keep the thing they have decided to die with in their mouths until the last second. Daenerys did not waste her hatred on a woman already spending her own. Someday, Jon said, because he knew how to name weather. Someday is not a sword, Daenerys said, and turned her back on the city. Someday does not harvest oats. When she returned to Winterfell, the glass houses had gone green as music. She stood inside with her palms flat on the warm panes, and the world outside lay white with frost again, the seasons playing their old games. Missandei came to her side and laid a sheet of parchment on the raised bed of herbs. "A letter," she said, "from Old Town. They have heard of your laws. They would like to send a maester who does not look down his nose when he writes." "Tell them to send two," Daenerys said. "One to keep the books and one to cure the sick. And if they want a fee, tell them to bring it with them. It will be our first tax on paper." They laughed together, and the sound had none of the cruel edges of laughter in stone halls in warmer lands. The leaf that brushed Daenerys' shoulder smelled faintly of pepper. She closed her eyes and breathed as if breathing a blessing. There were nights when she went to the Godswood and found Bran sitting as if he had never left the chair. There were nights when he was gone and she sat alone and listened to the springs. Once, on a night when the stars were knives and the horizon had a color she had never seen before, she felt a presence that was not a man or a woman or a tree and did not have a word. And she did not ask it for anything because she had learned that the best prayers are the ones that name what is without asking it to be otherwise. Years laid themselves down in quiet sheets. Children learned to skate the shallow parts of the steaming pools, squealing when a dragon's shadow crossed them. The free folk made houses that looked like boulders and planted cabbages that looked like fists. Sansa's hair went a shade darker and her voice a shade deeper. Jon's smile came quicker and stole away just as quickly when a worry crossed it. The way of men who have been surprised by happiness. Tyrion lost his taste for arguments that did not end in someone being fed. Davos's hands ached in the morning and he poured hot water over them and grinned at the pain. Daenerys had a scar on her palm from the night the dragonglass spear had slid through the Night King, if slid is the word for what happens when a thing meets its answer. Sometimes she rubbed the scar and thought of all the oaths she had sworn and all the ones she had kept and all the ones she had had to break because the world needed a different shape. She had come to a land that owed her nothing and made a chair out of a hearth and a crown out of a cloak that did not pinch the ears. There were women before her who would have chosen a different road. That was their story. This was hers. One winter afternoon, when the light was the color of pewter and the sky so low that Drogon's wingtips brushed the cloud like a hand across water, she walked the wall. Jon fell into step beside her. They did not speak for a while, not because there was nothing to say but because there was no hurry to say it. The yard below was full of a training bout. Wooden swords, shouted laughter, the slap of boots.
Sumawara a Podratlat.
Somewhere a baby cried the fierce, unapologetic cry of a creature that expects to be answered right now. "Do you ever wish you had gone south when you had the chance?" Jon asked. He did not look at her. "No," she said. She did not look at him. "Do you?" He thought about it for a long time, long enough that a wind shift brought a sheet of snow off the wall to eddy around their boots. "No," he said. "I wished it before, when the stories in my head were louder than the work in my hands. Not now." She smiled, and he did not see it, and that was all right. She looked out across the white. The world lay vast and waiting, and the waiting felt like a promise, not a threat. There are queens who choose battles. There are queens who choose cities. There are queens who choose the sound their names make in other people's mouths. Daenerys chose a hearth, and the north gathered close, and winter came and winter went, and the glass roofs sweated, and the dragons sprawled on hot stone like cats. And in the long reach of a story that had spent itself on wars and worn itself thin on thrones, the fire held.